This is the Bonus Section Podcast, episode number 1. Is there a success code waiting to be cracked? Are you the type of person that knows you were meant for something greater in this lifetime, and that somewhere inside of you there's a bigger version of yourself just trying to break through, but in spite of all your self-development, you can't seem to find the way up? Well, hey, you're definitely in the right place. I'm Danny Griffin, the founder of the Bonus Section and the host of this podcast, and a person just like you trying to learn how to live the most fulfilling life possible. Now, to help you take immediate action to get moving in a better direction, if this is what you're after, we take all the notes from each episode and post them at freethinkingtools.com. That's freethinkingtools.com. All right, let's get started in this first episode. Is there a success code waiting to be cracked? This is something that I've been obsessed with for a long time. And when I say obsessed with it, in the beginning of my life, I've just always been competitive. And I was always trying to figure out how to be more successful at whatever it was that I did. But I really understood that at some point in time, you just can't go here and there trying to figure things out and just do it in a spotted way. You have to get strategic about it. So somewhere along the line, I started studying success. I got really interested in it as a body of work, something to study outside of school. Gosh, I wish it was inside of school, and that's what I'm trying to get it to you early in life. I wish somebody gave me this to begin with. So I would tell you that along that journey early on, I would stalk the bookstores, the libraries, just trying to figure out in this success genre who had written about it. And had anybody cracked a code? I mean, was there such a thing as a universal code that anybody could apply to whatever their circumstances were, no matter what their background? Were they born poor? Were they born wealthy? Were they born incapacitated? Whatever it might be, I was curious, is there a universal code? Now, the first point here is as I studied that, I recognized there was a lot of treasure hunters. Meaning what? Well, there were all sorts of success gurus. And this is really before the internet, where now everybody with an opinion, a microphone, and a camera, like this guy, yours truly, now everybody is out there waxing on poetic about success. But I'm still a real student of this. And one of the reasons for this podcast is to share what I've learned. And so if you hear principles that you've heard before, that's right. I'm not trying to be original per se. Yes, I would love to do more discovery and put it in a better, more accessible order and really get more into the how-to. I think there's a lot of what to do out there, but there's not a lot of how to. How do you apply these principles of success to your life? So when you fish through a lot of those treasure hunters out there, or those gurus, or people who have put some of the order in information, I know you're going to stumble into Napoleon Hill. Now, a lot of you Napoleon Hill fans out there, or tacit fans, or somebody who have just heard a little bit about Napoleon Hill, you think, oh, that's right, Think and Grow Rich. I know that guy. Yeah, well, there's a bigger body of work here. So if you watch this on video, you're going to see me holding up, which is the equivalent of the Success Bible. This thing is massive, and it's called Law of Success by Napoleon Hill. It is massive. And this is more of a tribute to the body of work that this guy did. And so let me introduce you to that. And I want to introduce you to this work. I mean, there'll be a lot of directions I'll go into this podcast. Who knows where this journey will take me? But I have to say that this book is absolutely one of the most influential in general when people are studying success. I know some of the great gurus of today when it comes to success teaching, the guys like Napoleon Hill, influence like Tony Robbins, and all of Tony's predecessors, and a lot of the people that I'll talk about and study here, they all draw from this book. Why? Because once upon a time, access was granted to Hill. A very special access. You know, there are those moments historically where Jupiter aligns with Mars per se, and things just go right for somebody, and they're in the right spot at the right time, or maybe that's their predestined way that things were supposed to happen. So here you have this guy Hill, who's a reporter, simple reporter, and he's tasked with trying to get this interview with Andrew Carnegie. Now, if you do a little bit of studying on the Industrial Revolution, specifically in the United States, and again, this is not a United States-based podcast per se, but this body of success being studied brings us there at the turn of the century, going from the 1800s into the early 1900s. We're experiencing this unbelievable change. Times are changing. The reliance on oil, the reliance on railway, the reliance on steel. There's this revolution where things are being built like crazy and it's happening fast. And there are some people that are wildly successful leading the companies, and Carnegie is one of them. At the time, I believe when Hill is interviewing Carnegie or gets the task, he's the wealthiest man in the world. And if he's not, he's right up there. And again, how do you track that back then? Who knows? But let's just say the guy is wildly successful and with his steel company. And so Hill gets this access. And Hill, if you go back and you can YouTube and search him and you can hear him, he's a character. He's got like kind of this upbeat way about him, and he's a little bit nerdy and he's curious. So I can only imagine him going in with Carnegie. Well, it turns out what was supposed to be a simple interview in this access that was granted turns out to be a 3-day marathon. They just hit it off, and off they go. And Carnegie, during this moment in time, is not only so much into it, but he's also, I believe, impressed enough by Hill where he throws down this gauntlet. And as legend has it, he says, look, if you'll dedicate the next 20 years of your life to studying success, I will help you get access to some of the most successful people of our time. And he does just that. And Hill takes that challenge and says, yes, I will do it. I mean, imagine that. Imagine somebody coming to you and saying, hey, look, we've hit it off for 3 days here. We've been talking and we really connected. But I'm going to lay down the gauntlet, throw down the gauntlet. I want you to commit to a 20-year commitment. Imagine all you millennials out there right now, you'd panic, right? 20 years, or even me, I'd freak out. I mean, I just think about that. Oh, wow, what a challenge. And he's all in. Because he knows it triggers something in him. His curiosity, his desire to report on something, his desire to, like I like to say, chunk something up. He just gets triggered and he's in, and he's all in. So Hill goes on to introduce him. Carnegie goes on to introduce him to just a myriad of people who are successful. Now, when you take a look at this book or you Google the body of work, you will find that there are several people who really, Hill gets close to. And in fact, in this book, I'll go to the dedication page. He dedicates it to the 3 people that most influence this body of work. One is Andrew Carnegie, obviously. And the second is one that I'm a huge fan of studying as well. And that's Henry Ford. I mean, the Ford story is just amazing and spectacular. There's so many bits and pieces. And then there's Edward Barnes, who is a very, very close associate at that time of Thomas Edison. I mean, think about who we're talking about here. We're talking about being able to peek into the world of Carnegie, Ford, and through Barnes into Edison. That's pretty interesting. And if anybody out there is fascinated with success and especially business success, that's a pretty good lineup. So here you have it memorialized in this body of work, this book that can expose us to what is potentially a code. Now, does he really come out with a code? Well, again, he comes out with principles. And I think that begins to broach this conversation about a code. Now, he calls this a course. The idea was that he would turn this into a course. And so all of these people that participated, they're encouraging him because they believe it's simple. And that when people see this for the first time, they will be attracted to it and then they will go for it. And it will be a success. And obviously that turns out to be quite the truth. And it becomes a wildly large success. But let me just run through the 15 principles. He ends up with 17 as a couple of things are added or changed. And I'll talk about those in a second. The first one is actually one of those that becomes the 16th, because instead of talking about the power of the mastermind as an introduction, he includes it as a principle. So lesson number 1 in his course, his law of success, is the introduction to the mastermind. Right, this powerful, I'm not going to go down into all these principles at the moment. They'll make their way through this podcast over time. But the power of the mastermind, right? Is there this thing out there that is this great mind that we can all tap into? And can we stimulate it by meeting with each other in a masterminding type of way? Those are the concepts that I've yanked through it over the years. The next is near and dear to my heart. It is a definite chief aim. To have that very clear goal and to be after that very clear goal is really, really an important principle, and he has it right up the top. The next is self-confidence. Think about all of you out there that struggle with believing in yourself. He chunks that up as lesson number 3 in self-confidence. Lesson number 4 a really important one. And it's just interesting how he works this into the fabric of the course, but it's the habit of saving. You have to remember at the time, Ford, for example, and Carnegie, these weren't people that were born into great wealth. They were people that created great wealth, especially Ford. This stories about he and Rockefeller. I remember a story about Rockefeller, I believe, eating bark. They were so poor, they were eating bark off of trees. So this habit of saving was inherent in that culture back then, prior to, the roaring 20s of the United States when things were wildly successful. People came from dirt. I mean, nothing. Talk about organic farming. These people had to survive on their own. It was still a rough world out there to survive, and you had to hustle. So you know how to save. Whatever it was that you were saving. It's just this great, I know the first trigger will be about money, but what about saving food and storing that and taking care of it? But the habit of saving becomes a massive one. And the question is, in a world filled with debt these days, have we forgotten the simple idea of saving? Paying ourselves first? So that's an important one. Then he gets into the second volume here, where he talks about initiative and leadership. And again, there's a lot of these words might seem to you like buzzwords, but imagine them put into a course. What does it mean to actually take initiative? What does it mean to actually lead? And even if you don't fashion yourself one of those people, maybe you can learn how to become a little bit more like that, even if it's in pursuit of your own goal. The next is a massively important one, which I'll get back to and highlight, and that's imagination, right? Really important. The next is enthusiasm. I love what I do here on this podcast and the several others that I run, and I'm enthusiastic about it. I'm sitting here in my basement studio recording this enthusiastically, excited to learn myself. That's a big one for me. But yet in the same breath, self-control. That's his next principle, lesson number 8. Being in control. It's one thing to be emotional, enthusiastic, and upbeat. Another is to be organized and in self-control. Now, they might sound like they're juxtaposed and they're opposing, but in balance, these things are pretty special. Remember what we're trying to do here? Trying to crack that code for success. So it's not either or, it's balance here. I want to balance this out. The next volume, I love this one. I don't know why, but I've always felt like this. Lesson number 9, the habit of doing more than paid for. I always loved being the last guy out of the room. I don't know whether I was trying to prove it to the people that gave me opportunity or myself. Probably now I look back more myself. I always wanted to go beyond. There was always this place called the bonus section for me. And now I'm able to articulate it clearly and even call my podcast that. And that's what this is, doing more than is expected of you or paid for, right? Next, lesson number 10 is a pleasing personality. Think about that. It's pretty easy. There's a lot of things that affect us and make us feel negative about life, but are we bringing that into our interaction with people? Because you're going to need people to crack the code of success and get what you want. So you're going to have to learn to adopt a pleasing personality. Lesson number 11 is accurate thinking. Now, this is fascinating. None of us love constructive criticism to an extreme. Some people are better at taking it than others, but I don't think anybody loves to be wrong. But it is important to recognize when you're wrong and get accurate in your thinking. And you do that by studying, and that's what I'm trying to help you do here. Study success. Become a student, an enthusiastic student of this, so that your thinking becomes accurate and logic based in fact, not fantasy. Fantasy is great when it comes to imagination, but ultimately, what's in front of us, there's a lot of fact, and we can't ignore that, all right? And lesson number 12, concentration. So along with that self-control, the ability to sit down and concentrate on what we're doing, especially in a digital world that just is so distracting. Are you able to sequester yourself in a place where you can concentrate? All right. The next volume, volume 4. Lesson number 13, cooperation. How well do you get along with people and cooperate, right? Lesson 14. By the way, you see these themes recurring here? He's chunking up things that are similar, but cooperation and pleasing personality, they start to come together, start to make sense. Hear that code cracking? All right. Profiting by failure. There we go again about accurate thinking. This is what I was saying. Can you fail at something and instead of using all these cognitive distortions and throw it out and say, oh, I'm just not good at that, or, I wasn't meant to be this. Can you profit by it? Can you say, I wonder what went wrong there for me. Could I have learned something else? Was my thinking accurate? Let me just calm down and think about how do I profit from this? And I love this one, tolerance. At the core of all my business is to tolerate the differences in others. I cringe a little bit when I see people beat on each other about politics, sexual orientation, all these things. Look, a wise man once told me, live and let live. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with everything that's out there, but live and let live. Be tolerant. And that actually opens up your perspective as well. And you might be firm and fast in what you believe and how you believe, and that's great. I think that's wonderful. But to be tolerant and not to always be attacking other people based on their differences. What an awesome lesson to have. Lesson 16, the golden rule. Well, that's an easy one. And this is where we begin to see how his work and the principles of the people he studied were inspired by other bodies of work. Now, I'm not going to make this a religious or theological context, but you can find the golden rule pretty much all throughout the Bible, and I'm sure other great documents, right? Do unto others as you would have done to you. That'll be okay. It's been a long day already, and I'm all excited, right? Treat other people the way you want to be treated. There's the easiest way to say it. The golden rule. I love that. And in fact, it goes in line with all of my business philosophy, just to be people for others. I teach my real estate agents in our real estate company, just be people for others. Serve them. That's the golden rule. Be a servant first, expecting nothing in return. That's a winner, right? And lesson number 17 is this. This is where it gets a little bit interesting. He goes on later in life to hook up with W. Clement Stone, a wildly successful insurance guru, and they get him in a little bit deeper. And there's this universal law of cosmic habit force. I'm going to leave that one alone for now and not get too far into all this concept of the ether, but I'll talk about that for a second here. Hill believed that all of these ideas to help you be successful were just floating around out there. So between the mastermind and this cosmic habit force, all these things are out there in the ether floating around. Think about it. You have a lot of ideas that just come into your head. How do they do that? Where do they come from? And a lot of times, you're saying things that you heard or came into your head and you don't even know how it happens. You have to become aware of that. And what if you could tap into that ether where these ideas are floating around? What if it's like a super highway that, oh, hey, I want this, so I'm going to use, my resourcefulness and get up there. So that begs the third point here in this first episode. I believe that Hill believed that your best resource was your imagination. If you think about Hill's mantra, which you can find very easily in his book, Think and Grow Rich, it's what the mind of man can conceive and believe it can achieve. He means mankind, okay? Ladies, you're totally included here. Although, having said that, this book was written probably chauvinistically because all of the people referenced in here are men at that time. And I'm just guessing that at the time, that was who he was granted access to, and he focused in. Like I said, most of this is off of a couple of guys, Henry Ford and Edison through Barnes. But this can be applied to all of the wonderful, successful women of our time. So the idea is, let's just consider that our best resource is our imagination, because he says it in the mantra, what you can conceive. That means to sit down and conceive for yourself using your imagination and really thinking about you becoming this thing, or you tapping into this place out there, this super highway of information, and bringing it down and controlling it. That's how some of the greatest artists, music artists, do this all the time. I watched a Netflix documentary on producers, music producers, and it was just fascinating to me that all it took was this little machine called a Roland T808, if I get that straight. And they just used their imagination to come up with these beats that became the basis for incredible music, all through imagination. That's what it was. This resourcefulness. See, we want to believe that success is, we're born with this. Oh, well, he was just born a musical genius. What? I maybe an inclination to be interested in it, I would suppose. Maybe there are some wirings, but I think you have to be careful of that, because that will explain success away for you. Let's say you had an interest in music and you had no idea that you could dream into this rhythmic machine. What if you didn't even know that machine existed? You see where I'm going? He just believed that you had to imagine this first. Tap into your imagination. It's your number one resource. And lastly here, this is an important one for me. and I'm going to add this to what I believe is key to cracking a code in a modern era in my endeavor here. You have to start with what you want. He calls it the definite chief aim. But in my case, you have to give yourself permission to get it. And in this first episode, I want to do this really and underline this. If you know what you want, even if it starts as a hobby. See, I think a lot of people, well, I can't quit my day job. You're right, you can't. You have to put food on the table. I understand that. But what is it that you want? And you know what it is, but you won't give yourself permission to even consciously think about it. It's floating around perhaps in your subconscious. You want this thing. You've always dreamed of becoming this thing. Give it permission first to become a conscious thought. Because when it does and you open up that floodgates, then you'll be conscious almost every day. You'll spend a lot of your time thinking about that thing that you want. And you give yourself more and more permission to get it. And even if it starts as a passion project, just like this podcast here, the bonus section podcast is the thing that I really want. It's the thing that I want to do with the better part of my life, which is to teach and share and figure this stuff out with curiosity and get it to people to help them, to be a person for others. But it's starting in front of you as nothing more than a passion project. This is not the way that I make my living as of this recording. Maybe it will become so, but I don't worry about that. I gave myself permission to do this, and I want you to do the same for yourself. I've asked my kids, and I have 5 of them, so I'm a little bit of an expert there. And I've asked them since they could barely understand what the heck I was saying. But I said, look, if you could do one thing for the rest of your life, what would it be? And they would cross me out and say, oh, Dad, all those things that kids do. But as of the recording of this podcast, I have 2 of them already through college. And they're both doing exactly the things that they loved doing from when they were kids. One was a business-oriented gal, and she would be down in the basement with all the kids from the neighborhood running something called Tiny Town. She ran a whole economy in my basement, Tiny Town. To this day, she's down in New York City in business, running an Instagram profile for a major magazine. She's living what she was from the time she was a kid. And the second one is out in L.A., pursuing acting. Oh, it's so difficult. There's so many of everything. In her first 30 to 45 days, using her imagination, pursuing what she loved to do. She already got a part in a play. She's been out to multiple auditions. Stop letting people, including yourself, tell you that it's so dang difficult, because when you want it and you give yourself permission and you imagine that you can be successful at that, and then you just get to your nose to the grindstone and you keep going, you too will get it. All right? So the key points here. Is there a success code waiting to be cracked? Now, there's a lot of treasure hunters and gurus out there, but I would say a good foundational beginning, like I'm starting this podcast, is on the work called Law of Success by Napoleon Hill. Check it out. Get yourself a copy of it. And remember that he was granted incredible access at a unique period of time by Andrew Carnegie and got to study people. And then he chunked up these rules of procedure, or 15 principles, and made them simple and accessible. You want to know what they are? He added 2 later on, but they're all core to his belief system. But his best resource, he tells you, for you, is your imagination. Tap into it. And then, of course, this is from me. Give yourself permission to at least consciously think about the thing that you've always wanted, and then feed that thing until it becomes a passion project, and you just might end up making your entire living doing what you love to do and you always wanted to do. All right? Key summary point here. Many have tried to crack the code for success over many years. However, it was a simple reporter named Napoleon Hill who was granted access to some of the most successful people of the Industrial Revolution in the United States, who dedicated 20 years of his life, 20 years, to chunking this all up into 15, then 17 simple principles, which would become his course, Law of Success. And this would go on to inspire all of us to achieve more. Let's see what we can do with it and take it further. All right, remember, you can take immediate action to get moving in a better direction for your life, because we take all the notes from each of these episodes and we'll be posting them over at freethinkingtools.com. freethinkingtools.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so that you don't miss out on any of the insights each time we upload. right? Upload, whatever that word was, right? We also post all of those episodes on our social media channels, so you can find them everywhere. And remember, just turn on the notifications for the bonus section, the bonus section. We're living it now together. And you won't miss any of the reminders every time we go there. We also would appreciate it if you would share our content with other people just like you, so that they get the help they need, and you can join our mission of becoming people for others. Now, remember, I'm going to sign off the way I always do all my podcasts. Remember that nobody's coming for you. Nobody. So go get to work on yourself. See you in the next episode.